Hey everyone, welcome to another session of A Day in the Life of a BA. I'm James, the President of IIBA Ireland, and I'll be your host today. At IIBA Ireland, our mission is to support professionals by sharing knowledge, common terminology, and practical insights into the work of business analysts across different industries or sectors. And this series gives you the chance to hear directly from BA professionals about their typical day. Each month, we invite a different BA professional to share their personal journey, highlighting the approaches they take, the technologies they rely on, the tasks they do, the tools and techniques they use, and the challenges and successes that they've encountered within their industry or domain. So whether you're considering a career in business analysis, already working alongside other business analysts, or simply looking to deepen your understanding of the role, today's session is designed to give you that clarity, confidence, and a shared language for working effectively with business analysts. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Ian, a business analyst who has worked across multiple domains. Ian will be walking us through his own day in the life and sharing practical insights from his experience. Please feel free to turn on your cameras, and throughout the session, you're more than welcome to interact with our attendees in the chat. So please feel free to do so. And don't hesitate to drop your questions into the Q&A tab, where we'll address them at the end. So without further ado, Ian, it's over to you.
Thanks, James. Good evening, everybody. Connoisseur Tortu for anyone in Ireland. Who am I? My name is Ian Cort. I am the owner and director of Cort Consulting Limited. I set up my business back in February last year with the sole purpose of being able to provide my experience as a business analyst, as a product manager, as a product owner, into many organizations of different sizes, many of whom may not have those skills and experiences in-house to help with digital transformation programs, looking at solving complex business issues, and aid the development of new products and solutions. Since childhood, I've been curious. I've had hundreds of books about how things work. I crave to understand what happened behind the scenes, what makes things operate, how things happen, why things operate the way they do. And I would soak up as much as I could on things I was interested in. So that would often be cars, trains, machines, computers, engineering. Now, this was back in the 1980s. So this was pre-Google, pre-internet in kind of in a domestic sense. And you wanted to know something, you read a book. I spent my education doing biology, chemistry, physics, and electronics, and I graduated in 2000 with a degree in biological sciences. Now, for me, science was all about asking questions, understanding things, exploring, creating hypotheses, experimenting, understanding outcomes, and validating the theories. When I joined the workforce in 2001 as a software installation engineer, it was quickly retitled rather snappily professional service consultant. But back then, I had no idea what journey I was about to embark on. So the last sort of 3 decades, I've worked primarily as a business analyst across lots of different domains. I've had the job title of product owner, but inevitably a large part of what I've done has been within the concept of what we could describe as business analysis. One of the interesting ones which I did about 18 months was a company which specialized in bovine genetics. So they effectively bred bulls and then sold the bull semen to farmers to help improve the genetics within their herd, both in beef and dairy. So I was technically at one point a salesman for bull semen. So a bit of a conversation starter when you're meeting people about trying to explain what you do. Over those certainly the first decade, I worked with hundreds of clients. Sometimes it might be just for a day on a project. Sometimes it was several years. And even though I'd often have the title of consultant or business analyst, I would typically do pretty much everything. So you'd help in the pre-sales, you'd do the software installation, you'd be training, designing systems, sometimes writing the code yourself and managing projects. I've literally worked in everywhere from a garden shed to a tower block in the centre of some big cities. And even though I've had many different job titles, the business analysis underpinning people's problems, looking at the issues which they have and helping them map out the as is to be process and do the whole elicitation process has covered pretty much everything I've done over the last 20 odd years. And there's that passion I had as a child to ask questions, to understand the way things work, how things work, why they work, what's going on. That's really served me well for my whole career. A lot of those projects have revolved around supply chain, EDI, electronic data interchange, and integrating EDI systems into ERP systems. Sometimes it could be something very, very simple. So a basic order file into an ERP system may have 10 bits of information, but when you start scaling that out to a global SAP implementation project, when you're talking hundreds of messages and some very, very complex IDOC integrations, then you do start building up that level of complexity and the ability to start asking questions, understanding where things are coming from, and how to manage those integrations. Typically, when you're working some very, very large clients and as you're heading into the public sector, the need to make sure you capture things correctly and accurately is so important there. The kind of projects which I would often find myself in was ones where you really roll your sleeves up and dive into the data. You're understanding the business processes, where the data is coming from, the timing of that data being available, who is creating the data in the first place. In some instances, particularly in agriculture, we were trying to build a kind of a trading platform where the more information we could gather into a centralized platform, we could then enrich it and provide that data to other people in a sanitized format where they could do analysis and analytics and help plan their cropping programs or the best time to harvest if you're bringing weather data in. And one of the things which we discovered very early on was around permissions. So who actually has permission to use somebody else's data? So some of those workshops where you start to elicit the details, inevitably we were coming across kind of quite serious blockers in the process and the success of how that thing moved forward. So that sort of childhood inquisitive mind of asking questions has certainly played off over the years. I'd often do the BA work, but as I said, it could often move on to include development as well. So you'd be specing the system, designing it, understanding all the nuts and bolts and pieces. But sometimes you'd be a bit of a poke-to-turn gamekeeper, and then inevitably you'd actually have to build the system as well. Now, it's often seen as probably sort of bad practice to do that because you kind of end up being sort of like a poke-to-turn gamekeeper. You can't really mark your own homework. But what I found was when you are responsible for delivering the outcomes firsthand, the integrity and the discipline you need to make sure that you capture all that information at the beginning is even more so important when effectively you are solely responsible for the success of an entire project. I've found sort of over those, like the last sort of 10, 15 years of my career, things started to metamorphosize much more into core business analysis activities rather than having to be literally doing everything. And the ultimate BA gig, which I ended up doing, was actually for a client in Dublin. They were a large construction firm, and one of their subsidiaries worked in the healthcare industry. And this was one where if I ever get asked in an interview, give a description of how you solved a particular problem, this inevitably is my go-to example of where I've been able to use pretty much every technique and skill I've learned as a BA over the years. It was a brand new greenfield system development. The client supplied medical components into orthopedic theatres. If you imagine somebody that broken their leg, they've been brought in in an ambulance, brought into the ED, and they need to have a pin fitted into their leg and then put in a cast. So the clients which we were working with, they actually provided the pins, the screws, the joints, anything that you can replace in the body in an orthopedic theatre. They would provide all these components, and it was provided on a consignment stock basis. So for anyone not familiar with that term, effectively the product is owned by the supplier. It's sitting in the client's warehouse or storeroom, and it's owned by the supplier up to the point where it's used in the patient themselves. And at that point, it's then billed, and that triggers a replenishment of the item which has been used back onto the shelf. What became apparent very, very early on with the client was everything was on paper. There was no systems involved other than the ERP system that was documenting lots, bombs, and managing all the financial side of things. So very, very early on, it became apparent that this was going to be a pretty complex system to have to replace. We found out that nurses, when we actually went into the Mater Public Hospital in Dublin, everything was written on pieces of paper. So you'd have a carbon paper pad, and then they wrote on it, okay, we've used 2 of this lot number, 3 of this lot number, 4 of these, and then 1 copy would go to the surgeon, 1 in the patient notes, and 1 would eventually get passed through to the finance department who'd manage the invoicing. Now, quite often, as you see on the example on the screen, it would be a piece of paper screwed up and stuffed in a porter's pocket, and they're walking around the hospital collecting different bits of information. So by the time it actually got to the person who had to start using and processing the data, it was in a pretty poor state of affair. It would typically take around 48 hours from the patient having had the procedure to those items being replenished back on the shelf. If you can imagine on a day such as Paddy's weekend or New Year, the likelihood of having quite a few trauma cases coming into the ED in inner city Dublin will be quite high. So the opportunity to turn stock around, get it back on the shelves was one of the top priorities for what we needed to do in a new system. And another thing, with it being sterile products, you have to make sure that the item is within its expiry date. So making sure that these products, which are sitting on the shelf with a date, you're using the oldest products first. Quite often, they would literally grab the first one they found, and that would mean that sometimes products were sitting at the back, quite expensive. Some of these things could be several €1,000s. It's sitting on the back of the shelf being lost. So those initial discovery workshops were kind of opening lots and lots of doors. You're lifting up rocks and finding a whole new problem sitting under there. But it was a really exciting opportunity to get into a business and understand, how does this business function? What are they doing? Why are these doing these particular items? So I ran a series of 8 days on site. The client was out in Clondalkin, and we, working in conjunction with the head of products, head of projects for the clients. It was a case of going through the whole process. So each department within the business had its own very, very unique set of processes and ways of working. First of all, understanding the basics. How do you get stock from here to there? Where is the start point? Where is the end point? And driving all of that was the data. So we had an ERP system with all the data in. So that was kind of our go-to place for that information. But then sitting down with the nurses, interviewing the teams who are actually going to be doing this at the moment. So they're writing on pieces of paper. So we're going to be providing an electronic system to replace a paper-based system. What can we change? What can't we change? What are the red flags that we cannot remove or change in the process? And making sure that every single step of the way, we had buy-in and approval from the key stakeholders. Something which was quite interesting was one of the, I think she's the clinical nursing manager. She's responsible for all the nurses working in the hospital theatre for doing this process. This is something they don't want to do. Their job is to look after the patients, make sure they are being carefully well kept, making sure that any medical issues are being taken care of as a priority. Filling in pieces of paper or even on a tablet or on a computer screen is not something they wanted to do, but it was an unfortunate necessity that it had to be done. So making sure that we got full buy-in from them by building wireframes, building the whole process flows, and explaining very clearly, this is how it's going to work for you. We looked at a way of designing it so people coming in from a holiday who may not have had opportunity for training, bank staff who potentially may only be on that duty for 1 week or even a couple of days. It was something very, very simple to do. So step 1, click this button. Step 2, scan that barcode. Step 3, do this. It was a way of making sure that whatever we were building was very easy to use and easy to adopt. And at the same time, we weren't breaking any of the processes that needed to be done behind the scenes. Many of the times it was relatively straightforward. The principle of stock, order, delivery, receipt of delivery, was a very straightforward process. And it was only towards probably about 3/4 of the way through the workshops, we came up with this process, which was called a loan set. Now, if you can imagine a loan set being a large plastic box full of everything needed for a particular patient case. And these boxes would typically be moved around to different hospitals, different theatres. And once they've been used in a patient case, any item which had been used in that box would be billed back to the client, replenished back in the box, and then it would move on its way. Now, I would say that that one aspect, even though it seems quite simple when you're describing it like that, probably took about 2/3 of the time for the entire other process, because large parts of it sat in people's minds. It was that tacit knowledge that they just knew what to do. When you're kind of sitting down and describing, right, how does this work? There was kind of, well, it just does. And it took a lot of kind of trying to explore and deep dive into some of the very basic principles of, let's first look at the data. So what data is actually in your system? What information are we storing? When it goes into the theatre, what actually accompanies with it? Let's look at the paper trail behind it. Let's talk to the people in the warehouse. When you are taking one of these boxes out, the goods, sticking it in a van, what information are you recording? And it kind of was an opportunity to really use pretty much every single tool in a BA's kit bag to explore, to elicit, to understand. We had interviews, we had document analysis, we had process flow discussions. It had an opportunity to actually get on site into the hospital theatre and observe people actually doing their job in front of them, asking questions. Why are you filling that information in? What does that bit of data represent? And one of the interesting things that came out was that they actually, if a delivery came into the theatre storeroom, and it was a partial shipment, so they'd ordered 10, but they'd only delivered 8, they'd fold the corner of the paper delivery note over to denote that there's more of this product, there's more of this order actually coming on another delivery. So little things like that only came out as a result of talking to people and just explain. So, well, why did you fold that corner over like that? And it was only by observing it that this whole scenario came out. So when we're building the digital version of it, then we put a little triangle in the corner of that row. So straight away people could see, oh, there's more coming on that one. So it was a way of trying to make sure that the processes that people were familiar with weren't broken. We were just trying to digitize and streamline to make sure that the familiarity was there, even though they were using a barcode scanner to scan the product rather than having to key everything in. And on the back of that, after the workshops, the document analysis, the interviews, we did the whole as is process and then able to come up with that to be process moving forward. Now, at the time, the opportunity to do a fully agile delivery just wasn't there. It had to be kind of signed off as a waterfall project from the beginning. So in the end, it was about 200-page document. I built a fully interactive prototype using Azure, which is a fantastic wireframing tool. And that gave the opportunity to go into the theatre, go to the nurses, and actually let them play with it. So they could demonstrate scanning, they could demonstrate clicking the buttons, getting the navigation round. So you could actually do that. The UX aspect of understanding is the problem I'm trying to solve being solved by the way I'm trying to solve it. And those opportunities to sit down and work things through with the client firsthand were invaluable. And I'd never, in all the projects I've done since then, never quite had the same opportunity to go to that level of detail, working through the clients and going through all those opportunities and invitations to kind of get kind of a day in the life of the person doing that particular job. So I could then go away and kind of hopefully make it easier, make it better, make the whole system more effective and important. The biggest thing across all of that, the key success factor, was actually the people. And however technical you are within a BA role, and I'll come on to this in a few moments, the people were the massive success factor in this whole project. connecting with the people who are going to be using it, getting their buy-in, understanding their pain points, understanding what works, what doesn't work, was absolutely critical to get them on board. Because inevitably, not only was it a new system, it was a whole transformation program as well. And human beings naturally, most people I'd say, resist change. We don't like changing the way things we do. We don't like changing the way things we work. So overcoming those doubts and concerns was critical from the beginning. I'm a huge advocate of the principle around discovery starting with why. It's very easy to jump into the solution as soon as the clients or stakeholders started talking about their problem. And as a BA, I encourage organizations which I work with to support us having that access all areas pass. Provided you've got suitable clearance, if you have any security concerns, the BA should be able to go into any area of the organization and ask any question. The most important people in the project to me, they're not the MD, they're not the FD, the CTO, the CTO. These are the people at the bottom end. These are the people actually using systems and processes on workflows on a day-to-day basis. They're producing, consuming data in its most raw form. And typically, this is where you get that little nugget of information, which can often be the make or break of a system. And underpinning all of that is helping to ask that or answer that question, why? Why are we doing it? And I see it as a burden responsibility for the BA to guide that conversation to start as why. For me, I see three key pillars when it comes to a successful project that are critical for a business analyst to own and get an understanding on. The first is data. It underpins everything. The English language is data. It's a collection of letters, which once arranged in a certain way form words, and words are then formed into sentences and so on. Being able to understand that data is vital. You don't need to have a master's in data science to understand data. When you peel it back to its most basic elements, and that's something I always try and do at the very, very beginning, you start asking some very, very simple questions. What does it look like? What is the format? Is it XML? Is it JSON? Is it CSV? Where does it come from? Is it coming from this? How many different systems is it coming from? Who is actually creating the data? As I mentioned earlier about ownership in agriculture, who owns that data? Do you have permission to use it? You might have permission to consume it, but can you then produce it on somewhere else? Do you have that level of permission to do that? The timing around things, when does it get created? If you're building an interface that is time driven, are you going to get that information in time for somebody to actually use and do something with it? And how much data is involved? Back in the very, very early days when I was working on projects, we had a scenario where the timing was essential because the files were very, very large. And back then, we didn't have gigabit broadband. In some instances, we actually had dial-up connectivity. So file transfers were very, very slow. So big files would obviously have quite significant impact. On the back of understanding those very basic questions, I would then look to build either a relational entity model of the data to really help understand what's going on once we've got those basic questions progressing. I've spent well over a decade working on integration projects, that art of mapping data from one format to another and then building that transformation model and translation engine between them. And you have to understand that data first before you can then move on any further. And getting a data dictionary to understand key terms and definitions is another thing I find really, really helpful at that stage. Quite often, different businesses refer to the same bits of data in different ways, but we can de-risk that at the very, very beginning by making sure everybody understands what they're talking about when they're referring to bits of data. So the next of my key pillars, after you've gone through the system and data, is communication. If we consider that data is the technical aspect of a BA role, maybe the IQ, then communication becomes the EQ. There's still an element of IQ in that you're exchanging data between systems. You have to understand the protocols involved, how it's going to be communicated. More often than not, that exists in the realms of a solution architect. But for me personally, I want to understand how it's working as that information being communicated has a business and process implication, which then reflects on the outcome and success of what you're working on. And inevitably, in my own experience, you often get held accountable when things go wrong. So making sure you understand the whole picture, for me, is important. That EQ aspect of communication then is the art of being able to ask the right questions to the right people at the right time and then get the answers you need. And that event inevitably comes down to people and personality. I don't think this is something you can learn from a book or a course. You can't just go away and get a degree in communication when you have that human aspect in place. It's not impossible to do. Lots of people do it. There's lots of courses around it. But for me, and over the years, I've met people who are great at it. When you're dealing with the human side of business analysis, that does not come easily. I've visited hundreds of customers over the years, both UK, Ireland, and across Europe, and met and dealt with thousands of people. I've met some of the truly nicest people you could ever imagine, and also some thoroughly unpleasant characters along the way. But finding out the best way to connect with somebody, phrasing the question in a way that removes ambiguity, create that environment of trust, respect, and a desire to work together mutually to achieve the outcomes, they're vital. And it's almost the dark art of being a business analyst. It can often take time to gain trust, but on the other way, it takes moments to lose it. I found that you literally have a couple of minutes from meeting somebody to get a measure of their personality to then drive how those conversations are going on. On many occasions, working with clients on site, we're taking up their time. As BAs, we're asking questions from the people who are doing their day job. And when we're asking questions, we're stopping them from doing that day job. We often become that unwelcome distraction for people, stopping them from doing whatever it is they're trying to do. So making sure that when you're going into workshops or interview situations, when you're asking questions from people, is to try and pre-fill what you're wanting to do as much as possible beforehand. So they've had time to maybe prepare some documentation for you, have something ready. So by the time you're actually asking questions, they're doing an interview, you're doing some document analysis, then they've got things ready and you're not wasting their time while they go away and find something. Having those comms channels ready and open, that communication aspect to me has worked really, really well over the years. And it's a two-way street. We can ask the very best questions, phase without any ambiguity to elicit the details that we need. But we also need to be ready to understand what's coming back and interpret. We can hear what people are saying. It's easy to hear, but the listening bit is where it gets more complicated. There's been many occasions in workshops or meetings with clients where they're not willing to even hear what's been said, never mind going to that next level, which is the listen part. Assumptions are fatal. Some years ago, I was sitting in a workshop where we were investigating the requirements for integrating the software which I was working with into the client's ERP system. All the key people were there, the directors, the managers, everybody. But one of the people I insisted to be in that meeting was the actual operator. This was the person keying in invoices into the system who would be a critical part of the program and project we were working on. She was my primary candidate for that tacit knowledge, and the fireworks started when she highlighted something that everyone around the table assumed they knew was working a particular way, actually was something very, very different. So I just sat back for 15 minutes while they were arguing and shouting and working out what was going on. But the irony was that this was nothing to do with what I was actually looking to understand. It had no impact to what I was there for. But the questions we were asking actually uncovered another problem, which obviously they had to go away and fix. But for me, it was a great opportunity to see and witness people working together, and where you have those disparate things on the corner, how you can try and turn those things round. And when you start opening you're opening a door, looking at what's behind it, being prepared to kind of deal with the consequences of uncovering something which you're not intended to, but that could then have some serious consequences as you go down the line. And that ties into my final pillar, which is relationships. Again, you have an IQ aspect in relationships that links to data and how everything pulls things together. That relational model between data, business process, the flow of information, logic, conditions, and so on. But the EQ aspect is also vital. Building relationships with the stakeholders in the business is just as important as the data and information which you're trying to elicit. Years ago, I did a presentation at a user conference for the company I was working at the time. We brought in loads of our clients in, and it was kind of a meet and greet kind of sort of workshop. We did various presentations, and the one I was doing was talking about integration. So I extolled the virtues of integration, how it reduces double data entry, it improves data quality. It means that people aren't having to sit there keying in all this information into their system multiple times. It was only after the event I found out that why most of the people on the front row in this presentation were sitting there with their arms folded and really not looking that impressed, because these were the people who were actually keying in orders and invoices into their system, and they saw integration as a direct threat to their job. So that investment in building relationships with people, understanding who they are, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and understanding them as a personal level, to me, has paid off so many times, particularly when you're working on some very, very short projects. You get very little time to understand people's personalities and character traits. So making sure that you get as much out of them as possible via an empathetic approach, mindful of the time which they have to get their knowledge, has been so critical to my career over the years. And there's been hundreds of meetings like that, and I'm sure many people on the call have experienced that as well. On bigger projects where you are spending a lot more time, so 6 months, 12 months, maybe longer, particularly the medical project, I spent at the very beginning 8 days pretty much from 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening with the client, with the SMEs. And over the year of building up on a daily conversation, you start to understand their personalities. There's that human aspect of building up relationships really starts to come into place when you can support each other because you know what the other person's going to think, and you can kind of play off each other in meetings. And 6, 7 years later, I still keep in touch. I've got him on WhatsApp. We call each other every now and again. So there's a friendship that came out from working with a client and building up that relationship between us, which really helps that project to get delivered. And 8 years later, it's still in use in around half the orthopedic theatres across Ireland. So whatever we did a pretty good job of capturing the requirements, building out those processes, designing the system, and supporting those hospitals and medical team to get that project and product up and running. So that brought all three of those pillars together, that medical project. The data wasn't complex, but you had an ERP system being synced with a portal, being presented to medical staff who had no technical experience. So it had to be simple and easy to use as much as possible. The paper-based processes worked. They were rock solid. They were used day in, day out. Despite the poor handwriting, which inevitably would come into place with people are writing things out, it was trusted and relied on by the nurses, the warehousing team, the finance team. So ensuring that every area that was during that as is process and understanding that was vital. Winning over those key people within the hospital itself was a critical target. Somebody who was passionate about a job, protecting his staff, and getting her on board was critical, and those communication aspects was vital. And then, aside from me being an Englishman, working with an Irish team didn't put people off because I'm married to an Irish girl. I understand the lingo, I understand the culture, and I was able to help those communication channels start and get over any kind of barriers very, very early on to understand what was going on and help build up that concept of communication and trust all the way through that project itself. So with those three pillars described, they are the foundations which I try and build on. And I then use what I call 5W1H, the principles of who, what, why, when, and where. Now, the order sounds better this way, but I take the approach as I outlined at the beginning with the why. Why are we doing this? It's very rare the BA gets brought in at the very, very beginning to work on whatever we are to be working on. But the decision to do something has often been made at that stage. The contract's been won, the funds are in place, the why is inevitably agreed somewhere. But this is the first thing I always try and establish from my perspective is the why. The why is your primary signpost. It sits across all the other questions to give that context with where you are going as you start on that investigating journey. And it's a perfectly reasonable question to start, validating the why. Put it down right in the very, very middle of any diagram, and all other things can start sitting around it. That should be the measure against what you are doing from then on. Once you've got the why clear, you can then measure your efforts in other areas against it. Am I spending too much time on one area helping me solve the why, but then not somewhere else? I had a boss a few years ago who, after explaining a few minutes why I was doing something, his response was, so what? If it's not going to change something that has value and produce an outcome, why are you doing it? It's a really important question to kick things off. The what is at the other end of the scale. This covers both the as is and to be aspect. This is where you go into the details. I like to use the jigsaw here as an analogy. The why is the front box, the front cover of the box with the picture on. That sets the scene, the big picture. Then you look at the pieces. They, to me, are the what. The pieces are all known, they exist. There's all the whats are somewhere. It's our job to start finding them, to getting in the corners, turning them over so we can start building up that picture. This is where we earn the money. And for me, it's the bit I enjoy the most. Finding pieces, the same pattern, getting your edges all sorted out and worked into place. And there's numerous tools and techniques available to help with the what. Now, there's quite a lot of things on this diagram, but for me, I'd often use something like Miro or Draw.io as a tool to start throwing things together. I'd often start with cards with some words or brief statements on. Brainstorming in discovery sessions elicits a new piece of information. Put it down on the board. I don't throw anything away at the very, very early stages. If it's a new process, a new term, some data, something that you don't understand, write it down, because that is going to be part of the solution moving forward. 90% of the time will be spent in fixing a problem that you only do 10% of the time. And it's those edge cases, that random statement that somebody just has a throwaway comment in a meeting. They're the things which I always try and get a little bit more detail on and make a note to come back to. And gradually I start to refine this board into something that resembles a process flow. I then start to add some tags on as I go along the way. So what I've tried to describe on this board here is the basic process flow of some simple steps with a couple of decisions which then move on to something else. I will often use something like, if you're putting things in Jira or Confluence or even just an Excel spreadsheet, if I have a key, I'll stick a little note against one of the boxes on the flow diagram so I can then reference that and start asking more questions which I might want to understand in a workshop. If you have a UX element involved, if we can get a wireframe, let's stick that in there. So the first step might be the opening of a form on a page. Well, what does that form look like? Let's stick it on there. If we're pulling some data from an API, then before now I've actually stuck, well, this is my URL to my API endpoint. It's a get to pull this data in. This is my JSON array, and this bit of information is going to map into this field on my UX. It can get quite complicated, this diagram, admittedly, but something I found has worked really, really well is it tells that big picture. It explains every single aspect which is involved from a UI perspective, from a data perspective, from a business process perspective. And on many occasions, I've shown this to development teams and it's helped them set the scene. It's opened up their mind to the big picture of what they're working on. Because for me as a BA, I find that responsibility to set the big picture. Yes, we need to go into the detail, and this starts to elude the detail, but that big picture is available for everybody to look at has really, really worked for me on so many occasions to help that setting the scene, and it's there for people to refer to all the time. So that API call, what's that doing there? It's in the picture. They don't have to keep coming back and asking questions because it's there on a diagram for everybody to see. As I mentioned, two of my foundational pillars are non-technical. People are essential to the success of our role in doing a good job. Relationships and communication are intrinsically linked, both at a technical and personal level. Understanding the people, both internally and externally, is critical. It's sometimes seen the responsibility of a project manager to make sure everyone's working well together and communicating. But for me, it's critical that as BAs, we have a grasp of it as well, and understanding what people, their role, their responsibility, how they fit into that whole picture and a plan is critical. So I've mentioned a few times the most important who, and quite often the people who like to be the important people, the hippos, will sit at the very top of the food chain and like to make the noise and have the attention in the room and ultimately have the final say. But many times I'm sort of preaching to the converted. I'm sure it's the person at the very, very bottom. It's the operator. It's the person doing a process or a function on a day-to-day basis, which to me mostly is the most important who. But I caveat that they can often tell you what doesn't work, what they don't like, why things can't change, and whose fault it is that things are so bad. They'll be your biggest supporter if they have that mindset to see and support change, but your biggest headache to hold you back if they don't get in that. So I would often advise caution before proceeding with the most important who. But by framing and driving that conversation correctly, we can get the understanding of where the areas are to improve, where to look at the UX, what can change and what is stopping other things from changing, and who to talk to next. So I'll put where and when together because they go hand in hand and relate quite closely to data. Where are we going to get it from? Where are we putting it? And when is it going to happen? 20 years ago, CSV via FTP was just the norm. Nowadays, you probably won't even think twice about using it over a REST API or a SOAP interface. For me, even if you have solution architects involved to deal with the technical aspect of a system, I like to understand the data. I put it into my diagram. I like that visual map of where's the data coming from? What are you going to do with it? The English language is very, very powerful. So describing it in words, but a diagram just removes that ambiguity. Timing can often be seen as maybe non-functional. Maybe it's not the responsibility of BA to look at timing, but for me, it's important to have that big picture, the clear view of when things are going to happen. Many years ago on a project I worked in, we had a nightly file load that loaded product data into a system that would be loaded in every single night. When we were doing the testing, it took 25 hours to load. So as you can imagine, that was going to cause a problem very, very quickly. If we hadn't done that initial test to say, well, when is it going to take, when is it going to load? Then we would have had a lot of problems further down the line. So the where and when can fit into non-functionals, but making sure that I've got them understood, captured, and well documented is essential all the time, all the same. And then finally, the how. This is where the rubber hits the road. In all the BA roles I've done, I've always played a key part in the how. You've done the analysis, you've done the workshops, you've done the documentation, you've captured the requirements, you've done fantastic diagrams, the best possible description of how things work. But moving from then into actually building it is where kind of the BO product owner role can often get muddy. I've done them both. I've been a BA for many years, I've been a product owner for many years, and they overlap quite significantly. I'm working with a client at the moment, and the role is a product owner. But so far, in the last 6 weeks, all that I've ever done is pure BA work. The BA leads the process to get that functional spec, whether it's waterfall or agile, epics of features. To me, in my early days of the career, the job title was important. I liked people to know who I was and what I was doing in my title. But for me, the title doesn't matter anymore. The job you do, the work you do as a business analyst to elicit those requirements, to be that person in the middle, pulling all those bits together to build that jigsaw out is critical. And what matters the most is actually getting things done. The outcomes gathered in the discovery phase, making sure they're transposed such that architects and engineers can understand and build the system to a high quality that delivers the outcomes on budget and high quality. That is what matters. So in wrapping up then, my career has seen me travel across many parts of the UK, Ireland, working across many European cities, Australia, America. And of all the roles within the IT space, it is the one that I've enjoyed the most. It gives you a freedom to explore the whole domain, to ask really difficult questions and not feel out of place. Understanding how processes work, why does that happen? Who's doing that? When is this going on? It's a perfect job for people who've got an inquisitive mind. They don't like leaving questions unanswered, no stone left unturned. We get to play with a wide range of tools to document and describe things. I'm a very rebellious person. I don't like boundaries. Boundaries limit innovation. Yes, you've got cost and time to be mindful of, but to be able to have that freedom to ask, to elicit those details, to use all the different tools and work out the logic and how things work, to me is a really, really special place to be in. Anyone who's on the call who is a BA, I hope some of my experiences are not unique and it's not just me who feels it this way. For anyone who's considering a career as a BA, then I hope it's given you an insight into what life could be like. It can be very hard and challenging, particularly with difficult clients, complex processes, long days and nights. But when you get to see the results of the work you put in, the effort really is worth it. And I hope you enjoy it. So just like to thank James and the team at IIBA Ireland for that opportunity to share a day in the life of my experience.
Thanks so much, Ian. That was fantastic. Really, really interesting. And I love the way you included specific personal experiences and how you navigated those challenges. So that was really cool to see. In terms of questions, I don't see any in the Q&A chat yet. If anyone would like to come off mute and ask a question, you're more than willing to do so. Or you can pop it into the chat or the Q&A tab if there is any questions for Ian. Would anyone like to come off mute? Oh, Chris, you have a question.
Oh yeah, sorry, it took me a second to find the button to raise my hand. Oh, that's annoying sound. What advice would you have for somebody that's new getting into the field? Like I was having some conversations in the chat. I'm going into a whole new field of work, and my goal is to business analysis and organization development. I'm looking to do both because ultimately I suspect probably in 3 years, like I'm completing a master's degree right now, upgrading my grotesquely outdated education, but also specific to anyhow, I'm completing a master's degree, master's of business administration, where my major is business analytics, which I'm seeing is in my mind, I'm shaping it, whether the practical application is going to work, how I'm figuring it will, maybe not. But my first exploration is becoming a business analyst, just because of the steps that I plan on taking for the dual aspect. But for somebody new getting into business analysis, what are some things I should look into, like coding languages, just anything and everything you have? I won't not look into something just because like I don't stop. This is all I do. Honestly, like right now I've got 4 different learning areas and I just don't stop. I keep going. Just like the Energizer Bunny, just keep going and going and going.
I think the first thing I could say, I wouldn't worry too much about learning any kind of coding languages. I think it's easy to kind of jump down and start going down that route of getting very, very technical. I think stepping back and actually looking more at the business application side of the business process, understanding how business would work, rather than getting too much into the technical side. the vast majority of BA roles which I've ever seen would not go into that level of detail. So I would advise, unless you really wanted to do it, I'd maybe think more around opportunities in a pure BA space rather than learning coding languages. So I think that kind of be my recommendation, to maybe not go too much down that way and kind of sit my back more at the business process side, because I certainly found with developers as a BA, it's not our job as a BA to tell them how to do it. And I found if you get too technical and start describing a database schema or how an API needs to work, then they'll kind of push you back very, very quickly. So it might not necessarily answering your question directly, but as a guide, I wouldn't maybe jump too much down the coding side at this stage. But I think James has dropped something into the chat in regards to job aspirations from the Hamilton or Toronto side. But Mains, you want to
Yeah.
kind of connect on LinkedIn, and then we can have a chat offline about that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, very welcome to help with that.
I will take any and all information. Like, I spend 10 to 12 hours a day studying something.
Right.
I mean, like well, it's disgusting. Like, I'm thankful that I have the ability and time and opportunities I do. So that's why I'm here. I join. I'm now at a point where I can just join webinars and then pick people's brains and say, what can I do? The idea behind the coding languages is I've seen some what's the word, job postings for business analysis, and they look for Python, R, or SQL, or some combination of all of them. The use of Power BI, or I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but Tubular. I might be saying that wrong. But like Power BL or Power BI and Tubular, I think, are more of a way to like visualize data. But that might be more because like the major for my my MBA is business analytics, so I think that might be more of the analytics side
Yes.
of
Yeah.
displaying, and because I think that's what the coding languages are looking at too. But I've seen business analyst positions looking for like these coding languages, which kind of puzzled me because a business analyst doesn't do the coding
Yes.
for,
I would
say, like
certainly
you're
say that.
creating software.
Yeah, I'd say
So
kind of
that's
if that's pegged as business analyst, it's probably more business analytics. So certainly Python will be using for kind of doing AI or the beginnings of AI and machine learning and reporting. I do stuff in Power BI for some of my other clients, but the business analyst is kind of there's a line between where the business analyst in the true sense of the word stops and a developer takes over. And I think every company will have that line will be different in many companies. And I guess it's really what you personally would want from your career. Do you want to get more into the coding and analytics side, or do you want to sit more in the business domain and understanding the business processes? So it's kind of, I won't say you could do them both, but many roles, particularly in the UK and Europe, it's one or the other rather than kind of both. So do you like talking to people and understanding the business processes, or do you like coding? And kind of most permanent roles would be one or the other rather than kind of a hybrid of both, certainly with what I've seen with jobs out there.
ideally what ideally what I'm looking at doing is business analysis and organization development. I don't know if you read all the chat there. Like, I'm probably a year and a half away from being complete. Have that about a year and a half away from completing the MBA. I don't know exactly how long after that. I want to return to university and complete a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. Um, so the industrial part is the people, and then the organizational part is the organization. So like or I think I said that backwards. But it's so to me it's business analysis and organization development combined to make industrial organizational psychology. So it's uh, I'm trying to put into words what like I want to be a business analyst, but I also want to be an organization development practitioner. So I want the ability to, because to me that creates a holistic ability and view of what I can do to maximize value creation, because it's in any aspect, whether you're changing something just for the business, you still need to change the people, and to change the people, sometimes you need to change the business. So like for me that creates the ultimate, um what I want to do. I want to, like, I don't know whether I'm just going to be a consultant working for myself, or maybe I'll find an organization that's looking for me. I don't know. Like I've been applying to junior business analyst positions, but I currently have no experience in the field. I've been a Brinks employee since April 2008, and like I was rear-ended and damaged my spine, and I can't return to that. Like I'm permanently disabled. Like I'm not crippled by any means, but I have my limitations prevent me from working.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why I'm looking for remote. I mean, like obviously I may have to go places from time to time, but then I plan out and do my best.
Yeah.
But ultimately, any and all information you have, Ian, I sent you a connect request on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Yeah, we can chat on that.
And same with you, Mark. I sent you one too, and I see you accepted it already. But I'm gonna mute myself because there's other people that have questions, and I could sit here and just talk all day. It's
no problem. Thanks, Christopher. Great. I think we've got Ravini with his hand up.
Hi, Ian and James. I'm in a similar situation to Christopher in a way. I was in financial services and I took time off to do my own thing, and I'm trying to go back into it, but I was on the investment analytics and performance analytics side. But I now want to get into business analyst work because I'd like to get into contract roles where I can have more of a dictate when, rather than be ideally tied to a company in the long term. But I understand at the beginning I'll have to perhaps be tied to a company. I'm not fussy what happens in the short term, but I just want to get back into work. So I just wondered, what suggestions do you have? Because when I've been applying, I haven't really got anywhere. And today I actually had a call with the FDM group that has a returners program. And when I told my background, she said, oh, because I was looking into change and transformation side of things, and she said, doesn't look like what you've done in the past is in a commercial setting doing the change and transformation kind of stuff. Although I was involved in my company's takeover where we had a huge, I did a data migration project where we migrated millions of data points. So, that kind of thing I thought was good enough for change and transformation, or what you like to translate, to just give me a foot in. But, I'm struggling, and, so to think that someplace like FDM group, which apparently pays you rock bottom and gives you a slave driver kind of job, and I can't even get into that after being at a pretty decent place 10 years ago. I'm feeling very discouraged.
Something which has worked for me. So as I did for 23 years working as an employee in companies, and then I left and set up my own consulting company. So it's just me at the moment. But the thing which has worked well for me in that respect is, particularly on LinkedIn, is start finding the kind of people who are talking about the problems that you have answers to. So connecting, certainly in the recruiter space. So I start connecting with any recruiters who are talking about anything in the BA space, anything in the product space, and then actually engaging in conversation directly with them. Because at the moment, applying for a job is pointless, because you've got 800 people applying for one job, and the chance of you actually being seen. But it kind of ties into kind of the communications aspects of my 3 pillars. That it's people who will interview and people want people ultimately. And by bypassing the automated job application, which has got all the automatic screening stuff, is the first thing I did. And that has been, to me, much more successful of actually finding people, finding opportunities in finding somebody who said, I've got this job offer here, or does anyone know someone like who's looking in this particular area? Connect to them, have that direct one-to-one conversation, and then you've got your foot in your door straight away because they talking to somebody who has got the answers to the problem which they're looking to solve rather than having to go through and screening CVs.
Yeah, the thing is, when I've applied for jobs on LinkedIn and there's been a recruiter where you could message and I've messaged them, they have never replied. And so I wasn't really sure whether recruiters are really like, whether I don't want to be like a pest or like be spamming people, so I wasn't quite sure, like, whether they really care to have that kind of communication, whether I'm not doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, by all means, drop me a LinkedIn request, and then
Okay.
we can have a conversation. Just can
Oh,
share
that'd be
my
really
thoughts
nice.
on there.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll hunt around to
Yeah.
see what else they have on the recruiter side that I could
No
perhaps
problem.
get more. Thank you so much.
No,
And thank
pleasure.
you for the webinar. Cheers.
Okay. So, does anyone else have any thoughts, observations? Anyone who's kind of shared a similar experience to kind of some of my experiences through my career, or anyone who's looking in a BA role at the moment and they've got any thoughts from what I've shared? Please put the hand up. Mark, go for it. You're on mute at the moment if you're talking, Mark.
Sorry about that, Ian. Thanks for the great presentation. Thanks, James,
Pleasure.
for putting this together. And thanks everyone for the good questions so far. I think I put it in the chat, but I was just thinking, Ian, have you came across like any great organizations that you worked with or businesses that you worked with that have had like a great setup for the way they work with business analysts or process management, like pre and post implementation, like the way they structure their teams so that like requirements are maybe captured really quickly and enhancements can happen and systems can get improved well. That's just the structure I'm trying to sell in the organization I'm in. We're trying to build like some process excellence, and I'm trying to sell the process management side of it, and it's hard to get it into a few skulls sometimes.
I think it often comes down to its people. I think certainly in pretty much every project I've been in, there've been some fantastic people, but it's those individuals who we kind of have to kind of convince and win. And certainly what's helped is if you can find one person who gets it, they buy into what you're trying to do, they buy into the way of working, the process around it. They are your kind of biggest advocates within that organization to try and encourage and get people on board. So I think it's not kind of, like say, a one size fits all thing. It's understanding the people who are involved and seeing those who can see that glint in the eye where they really get what you're talking about, and then try and work with them, and they then become your advocates to try and start converting other people. So I don't think I've done hundreds of projects over the years. I don't think there's been many which have been perfect. Small businesses, even though they're a bit more chaotic, small businesses are often more willing to change because the impact is a lot less. But with the bigger organizations, I think getting those individuals on board, convincing them, bring them on that journey, they then become your advocates to transformation. And it's kind of patience, I think. Just patience and work at it. You know what you're trying to do, you know the successes, being able to convince people, have that kind of elevator pitch towards success, I think has certainly worked. And getting that, as I said at the beginning, getting that why nailed down, why we're doing this. If you can remove any doubt around the why, you're then in the realms of why not, rather than trying to convince. So once that why is nailed, then the rest helps with other people to kind of support you on that journey.
True. That's great, Ian. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. So
I think we
James?
have a question from Jen in Q&A. Jen, do you want to come off mute? You're still here.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hey.
I hope you don't mind having my camera still off because it's a glorious 6 a.m. where I am.
Right. Thanks so much for joining.
No, this is great. Thanks for sharing your experience, Ian. There's a lot packed in there. My question was, if you're new to the industry, so say in the health industry, how much knowledge do you think you need to have to conduct successful business analysis?
In terms of domain knowledge, theoretically, nothing.
Yes.
Theoretically, nothing. In every BA role I've done, I've known absolutely nothing about the domain which I'm working in, because we are there to facilitate, to elicit, to kind of poke around, to ask the questions. The domain knowledge sits with the SMEs, and trying to encourage them to tease out, getting there what they know, getting that down on, I'd use paper, on a whiteboard, on a diagram. They're the people who know their business. I'd always see the BA role as the kind of the glue that pulls all these bits of information together. So I'd be more interested in getting the techniques around elicitation, and then the domain knowledge will naturally fall into place. So I've worked in airport industries. You have a rough idea how an airport works, but we don't have a clue about what happens. But the people in the business know. I've not worked specifically in the pharma industry, but I've done quite a few projects in the medical sector, in the supply chain sector. I'm working in the workforce management in the public sector at the moment. Having the question, knowing what questions to ask, and getting the people who have the knowledge talking, and being able to ask the right questions that opens their mind up and helps them to answer those questions, I think is what the BA role is. You would get domain expertise who would be a BA, but I'll be less, if I was interviewing, and I've interviewed lots of times, I'd be more interested in the way they talk, the way they interact with people, those EQ skills around communication, building up relationships, building trust, to me is more important than very, very specific deep domain knowledge.
Yeah, thanks for that. I resonate with that as well. I just find also sometimes the more projects you do in a particular industry or domain, it's hard to get out of sometimes because
Yes.
you've seen that as the
pigeonholed.
expert. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but thanks for that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think we've run way over time, but thanks so much, guys, for sticking around, and thanks so much, Ian, again, for presenting.
My pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you as a speaker, and I hope to have you back in the future. For anyone who's looking for the recording, it will be posted on our YouTube channel in about a week's time, so there will be a notification that will go out just to let you know. But thanks again, Ian, for taking the time, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone, or night, or wherever you're joining from. And thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting this. This was a great learning experience. You'll have a great day.
Thanks. You
Thank
too.
you.